Well, coming in, if you are new or visiting, my name is Matt and I get the joy of being the priest in this beautiful community. And we are in the middle of a little series looking at Revelation. And the reason why we're digging into Revelation this year is that we've just been pondering and praying. And the beautiful thing about Revelation is that it's this gift of a vision. John is given this gift of a vision of heaven. And he gets taken up to heaven and he sees this gorgeous vision of what God is going to do. Like what it's going to be like when God comes back and heaven is like fully present with us. And we get to see God sat on the throne and there'll be no more tears or suffering or death or pain or none of that stuff. And we get to see this gorgeous moment. And it's really given to the church as a gift because they're about to face really hard times. It's given to them because extreme suffering and persecution is coming their way. And it's this moment where they get to say, this is coming, but God is good. This is coming, but Jesus reigns. This is coming, but this is temporary. But what will last forever is God's goodness and his kingdom and his victory over suffering and death and pain and everything else. And so that is why we're heading in here. The kind of arching kind of theme this year is that, hard times are coming, but God is still in control. God is still loving. God still reigns. And we get to see that beautifully and wonderfully worked out in our lives. And so we're going to dive into I think this is the third or fourth letter in Revelation. And we're slowly working our way through. And so if you would like to turn with me to Revelation chapter 2. You right, Leaves? You good? What's going on? Right. So, Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 to 11. You're right, Law. Crazy kids. You know what's worse than having kids in church? No kids in church. And so, where are we going? Revelation chapter 2, verses 8. The angel of the church in Smyrna writes, "These are the words of him who is first and last, who died and came back to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but they are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you're about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you'll suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of eternal life and glory. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. He will overcome, will not be hurt at all by the second death." So what do we know about Smyrna? Smyrna sounds like a disease, but it was a beautiful city. And sounds like the thing you go to your doctor. This is a totally off script. Smyrna sounds in my brain all week. It's like that thing you go to the doctor and you go, "I've got Smyrna." Sounds like a horrible rash, doesn't it? But it is not. It is this beautiful, beautiful city. And it was kind of like a mini Rome in Turkey. And it had a very, very, very strong alliance with Rome. And it was the center point in Turkey for emperor worship, worshipping the Roman Empire, which naturally poses a challenge to the Christians, because the Christians are saying Jesus is king, Jesus is God, and everyone else around them is saying Caesar is God. And so they're facing this real battle of who is God in this city. And there is also this synagogue. There's that bit you might have picked up about this synagogue of Satan. I'm going to come into that with a bit of detail later. But the synagogue isn't just sort of vaguely kind of opposing, like the Christians. They are actively against them. They face fierce opposition to the extent, these Jews would be like calling down curses on the Christians walking past. As they're off the church, they're literally calling down curses upon them, and probably some commentators say, and onto Jesus himself. They are active, vigorous in their opposition to these Christians. And you have to remember that the Christian faith at this point is not a new religion. It's not like someone's just thought it up and has kind of imagined it out of nowhere. The Christian faith is the belief that Jesus is the fulfillment of ancient Jewish promises. That Jesus is the fulfillment of promises and prophecies to the Jewish people. And so these Jews that are persecuting Christians, they're not like faceless figures online. They're people that they used to worship with. They're family friends. They're loved ones. They are perhaps family themselves. They're not just a faceless mob, but they would have known them deeply and been loved by them deeply. And so the church in Smyrna, these disciples, they're trying to do their best to follow Jesus, to be obedient to him, to say Jesus is king, but they're facing very, very real troubles, very significant challenges, and genuine opposition. It's kind of interesting for us in this time, isn't it? Like us in a time where our faith seems to be ripped apart by people around us. Ripped apart on campus, ripped apart in the workplace, ripped apart online, ripped apart with our family. And I guess part of the reason I wanted to dive into this series is because this is what we face. And it's only going to get worse. There was a student at the coffee trailer about, I don't know, I've said this story so many times, forgive me if you've heard it and you're bored of it. There was a student, I don't know, 9 months ago at the coffee trailer, who came up to me and said, hey Matt, can we talk about, I can't remember what it was, like one of the kind of ethical issues that we face today. He said, hey, can I just talk to you about X? And I said to him, just before we dive in, I need you to know that I've got a historic understanding of my faith, that I've perhaps a more conservative view than most in my church. And, I think I fumbled around and I was saying, but he's like, what are you trying to say? I was like, I think we might disagree. I think we might disagree. And he said, that's exactly why I've come to find you. I've come to find you because I am bored of a truth being malleable. It's exact words. I'm bored of a truth being malleable, and I want to find someone who believes that they have a rock-solid foundation for what they call truth. I was kind of taken aback. I was like, wow, that's a statement, isn't it? And, we had actually a really beautiful conversation, and he left, and kind of with a smile on his face, saying, I knew we were going to disagree. But, we kind of left, and he came back a few weeks later and said, do you remember that conversation we had? And I was like, I remember that conversation we had. And he was like, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? Or, and we had this ongoing kind of conversation over a few kind of weeks. It was this really beautiful moment. But I think that the times that we are facing is that our faith will seem like it's in the fire. It will feel like we're jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. And I originally titled this talk, Silverware in the Suffering. Silverware in the suffering, but it didn't really cut it. I kind of didn't want to talk so much about the suffering and the natural disasters, but rather suffering because of our faith. And therefore I called it Riches in the Troubles, because I want to talk about us getting into trouble because of our faith. But it seems like the world has never been more scary, does it? The world's never been more polarized. We've got the world's richest man at an inauguration of a president who owns the greatest, communication sharing thing, Twitter, and people are asking the question, did he just do a Nazi salute? Crazy times. We've got huge social polarization, don't we? We haven't just got faceless people behind, keyboard warriors anymore. We've got people that have designed thousands of bots to troll people and to misspread information and further polarize. We're in trouble as society. The greatest lie has to be you do you, right? That has to be the greatest lie of this age. You do you simply doesn't work because no one can show up as just them anymore, because everyone is worried about what will happen if I just be me. It isn't working. This world seems so polarized, and it feels, because of the polarization, that the world is trying to sanitize religious beliefs. Sanitize things that seems unsatisfactory to a world where the God at stake is hedonism and pleasure and me, myself, and I. And therefore we have two categories in society, safe and unsafe. And it feels like faith is falling into the category of unsafe to many of my friends and people around me. And therefore we're facing these real challenges, real hard times. We're facing tricky times where we've got to say, hey, I think this is what Jesus is trying to call me to do and to say and to proclaim and to love and to heal and to restore. But it's falling on deaf ears because we are bundled into the category of unsafe. Yet we have a beautiful and bold job to show people who Jesus is, to show people the way he loves and he cares and he wants to get involved, and the closeness and the beauty that it is when we are in relationship with our Creator. And therefore we have a risky business of faith where we are called to put our head above the parapet and say, in the middle of this social polarizing war zone, hey, I think Jesus might be calling us too. Hey, I think Jesus might be saying, hey, I think Jesus might be loving in this kind of way. And this is what John is trying to do. Trying to prepare people for a world where it's not going to be easy, to announce the love of Jesus, to proclaim who he really is. But how does he start? How does he start? Well, he starts with a reminder of who Jesus is. Verse 8, he says this, "These are the words of him who is first and is last, the one who died and came to life again." These are the words of him who was first and last and came back to life again. John is telling us who Jesus is. He makes a point on every one of these letters to start with a theological statement about who Jesus is. To say, hey, look, I know times are hard and I know you're facing opposition, but remember, Jesus is the one who started time and the one who's going to wrap it up. He is first and he is the last. And he died and he was the first to come back to life again. See what we get to inherit. I wonder, like, as I was preparing this, I was just pondering to myself, like, I wonder what would happen if we, as a little community, started each of our texts, each of our, messages, each of our conversations, each of our, gatherings, each time we kind of have a brief conversation by saying, hey, before we dive into that, I just want to remind you of how beautiful Jesus is. Like, imagine how that would change us and our community. Yeah, it'd be kind of weird, wouldn't it? You get a text from, like, me or Peter, like, in Jesus' name, who was, the first to rise from the dead. Are you free for coffee this week? It would look a little bit strange, wouldn't it? But imagine the impact it would have on us. What's his point? Why is he starting with this? He's saying Jesus has the authority. Jesus has the authority. Not Caesar, not the synagogue, but Jesus has the authority. He knows the context upon which he is writing. Jesus is the one who starts and wraps up time, not Caesar. Jesus is the one who is at the center of it all. He is not a mere mortal, but rather he is God incarnate. The God who becomes flesh and blood for you and I. Why to love? And actually, he's saying this in the context of the Jews persecuting, and he's referencing Isaiah 44, a text that they would know. This is what the Lord says, Israel's King and Redeemer, the Lord Almighty, I am the first and the last. Apart from me, there is no God. He is referencing something that is deep and contextual to who they are as a community. But what does he go on to say? Who died and came back to life. When Laura and I got married, we got a little cat. Actually, I kind of emotionally blackmailed Laura into getting a cat. We had this beautiful cat. We used to live in Balham in London, and we had this cat that would follow us home. It was a really sweet cat, and it would sit on our little windowsill. We lived in one of those gorgeous London houses, and we lived on the kind of the first floor, and we had this gorgeous window. You see the windows with the flowers, like in London. Yeah, have one of those houses, and we had this cat that used to sit there and mew at us, and Laura got a bit attached to this cat that obviously wasn't ours. And I kind of played on it a little bit. And I'd say, oh, you're going to leave that cat? It's rain. Oh, Laura, you can't leave the cat in the rain. Oh, it's probably hungry, isn't it? Like, I was being a bit mean. I was teasing Laura a little bit. And then I named the cat. I was like, we should call it Ralph. We should call it Ralph the cat. Just to add a bit more, when you name something, you get a bit more emotionally attached to it. So anyway, we got married. And then about 6 months later, we got an offer to move to Bournemouth to start a church. And I said to Laura, if we move to Bournemouth, we should get a cat called Ralph. Leave behind the cat in London, get a new cat. So we've got this cat. I should have got a picture. We've got this cat called Ralph, who is not a stray cat, who is our cat. We've had him 11 years or whatever it is now. And Ralph, there's two kinds of cats. There's the cats that sort of sit in the corner by the radiator, and then there's the cats that are hunters. Ralph is a hunter. Anything in our garden, Ralph will catch. He's brought in birds that, he's mutilated and the fly at sort of this high. That was a fun one to catch. He's brought in mice. He brings in guts feels like every other week. He hunts. And this one time he caught a frog, right? Our neighbours, I don't know, they were obsessed with frogs. I don't get frogs. Anyone who likes a frog, you're slightly strange, but that's okay. So they're slimy and they're weird. And anyway, so he caught this frog, right? And look, it was right before we went to bed. And he has this mew that is I've caught something. as he did this mew, and we were like, oh gosh, what is it? And so we were in our pajamas, about to get into bed, and this frog, I kid you not, starts jumping around. And I'm like, Ralph, get the frog. Yeah, he picks it up. I'm like, get out, get out. And he just shook this frog like a dog would just shake like a squirrel, and like, shook it and flung it across the hallway. And our flat was quite small, and just laid their belly up. And Laura like ran into the bed and she's like, deal with the frog. And I was like, what she said to me, she said, put it in the bin. I was like, okay, I'll put it in the bin. This frog's like laying belly up dead. The only thing I could find was the korma, packet that we had that night, like used curry dish. So like without trying to get curry on the floor, I kind of like scraped the frog, put it in the thing, chucked it in the bin. And then the next morning we had a 7 a.m. prayer meeting, is what we did at church. So I went off to 7 a.m. prayer, and then I got a call about 20 minutes in. Laura was like, get home now! And I was like, okay, Laura, this is a bit strong. Like, what's going on? And she said, the frog is not dead. The frog had jumped out of this curry container, I kid you not, covered in korma, jumped out of the bin at Laura, like, opened the bin, it just literally jumped up in her face. And this curry covered, I had to go home and get this curry off the carpet and frog back in the bin. What's the point? Like, the point is this, like, what they are expecting is not what is. They're expecting, the people around are saying Jesus is dead, and they're saying, no, Jesus is not dead, he is alive, he reigns, he is the first to come back from the dead. Tom Wright, who we've been following in this series, says this: our politically correct age would be much more convenient if real life challenges did not happen. Sorry, in our politically correct age, it did not happen. But they did, and they do. It is impossible simultaneously to say that Jesus was raised from the dead and is so God's true Messiah, and that he wasn't and isn't. John is doing two things here. He is reminding them of who Jesus is. He's reminding them of who he is. He's reminding them of what is to come. This beautiful resurrection life, the promise that when we follow Jesus, we follow in this resurrection life. And secondly, he's promising this joy in the life to come. The ultimate barrier has been broken, and there is no more fear as to what will be, but an eager expectation that we'll land in this place where there'll be no more pain or death or suffering or cancer or disease or, tears. But he's saying hard times are going to come. Hard times are going to come. And so I've spoken for 17 minutes. I was hoping for 14 minutes. So we're going to break out at this point. And I'd love us just to talk about this. Have you ever faced opposition because of your faith? And how did you respond to it? And what did you learn from it? If you're not a person of faith in the room, well, why don't you just ask the question, like, what would it look like if you were a person of faith? Like, where would you get opposition for it? Is that okay? Can we break out for 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back in? Verse 9 says, where are we? Verse 9. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews, but they are not. They are a synagogue of Satan. There's this beautiful moment. You are rich in what? Life, knowledge, freedom, joy. This phrase acknowledges that suffering and material deprivation that the church faced is so real, but it declares something so much more beautiful. Smyrna was this beautiful, wealthy city. I said at the beginning, it was like gorgeous architecture. It was a mini Rome. You'd walk through and you'd be amazed by what you saw. It was beautiful in every way. But the Christians were marginalized. They were genuinely economically disadvantaged because of their faith. This affliction refers to persecution, trials that they endure. And despite this material poverty, they're described as rich. There was this guy in the Midwest, 2011, who was a scrap metal dealer. And he was in this flea market, and he found this egg that he bought for $14,000. It looked like this. This egg, $14,000. And he bought it, and he knew what it was worth, kind of in scrap value, and it was pretty, and it was made kind of well. And he took it home. Actually, I don't know who carries 14,000 quid to a market, but he did. And he took it home, and he looked at it, and he realized on the bottom there was an inscription that he kind of, it was familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. And he kind of did a bit of research, and he realized it was a Fabergé, I've said that wrong, Fabergé egg. Fabergé, yeah, great, okay. Fabergé egg. And these eggs made in the late 1800s for the Tsar Alexander, like old, beautiful eggs. And so he did a bit of scratching, and he realized like the craftsmanship didn't weigh up to the value. And so he got it valued, and he went to this guy in London, in Mayfair. He kind of did some emailing, sent it across, and this guy said, you have to bring it in for authentication. And he flew with his egg from the Midwest of America all the way to London, landed in London, and went to Mayfair to this shop. And this guy, apparently, as he saw it, he said, where did you find this egg? And he said, I found it in a market. And he said, you found it in a market? What he hadn't realized is that he had stumbled upon the holy grail of antiques. This egg, which he bought for $14,000, was worth $33 million. Fabergé egg. Like, it is like priceless collectors. It was sold later on as for an undisclosed sum 3 years later. This guy had no idea what he had stumbled on. He knew it was shiny, and he knew it was beautiful, and he knew it was like crafted really well, but he had no idea what he had. Something that would, push him into being an ultra high net wealth individual, something way beyond the material goods. John is saying to us, we hold something similar. We hold something precious. We hold something that we can't understand the value of. Again, it throws us back into last week. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. In a financially rich city, he is redefining what value really is, what's really important, what's of true value. And in a city which is known for beautiful buildings and architecture and banking, and John is saying all of this is going to fail. All of this will fade. Real wealth is not found in capitalism. Real richness is knowing who you are created to be, knowing your Creator, knowing who you were called to worship. It's not found in the rat race, but rather in worship. And therefore, he goes and says, I know your afflictions, your poverty, you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews, but they are not. They are a synagogue of Satan. And perhaps you're new to church, you're new to faith, you're new to this community, and you read that and you think like, that's a bit harsh. Like, I thought these Christian lot were all about love and care and peace, and this is a bit too far. Like this. Like, didn't you say, Matt, these guys were cousins and brothers and sisters and loved ones and people they'd known all their life? Like, this is like way too far. We have to dive into the context. We have to understand what is really being said. I think Jesus is about making love and peace, but what he ultimately wants to do is to topple unjust structures in our society. I think Jesus cares more about justice than we could ever imagine. Our peace and our prosperity comes at the price of someone fighting for it. And therefore, the message puts it in a really beautiful way. I hear the claims of those pretending to be good Jews who are, in fact, they belong to Satan's crowd. It's bold. Tom Wright, again, to the rescue. Tom says this: the Jewish synagogue in Smyrna had become a Satan synagogue, not in a vague, general, abusive sense, but rather in a sharply defined sense, as the Satan is literally the accuser. Satan is literally the accuser. The synagogue in town had been accusing the Christians of all kinds of wickedness, in particular in a city where Roman imperialism, presence and influence was everything. You see what they are fighting against. Many people would skip this passage, but I want to dive into it and go the distance. I want to ask the question, where do you feel accused? Where do you feel accused? Where do you feel falsely accused? Do you have invasive thoughts? You don't quite know where they've come from. Is it friends? Is it people you live with? Is it college? Is it university? Is it colleagues that push you? Is it the fact you've never got a raise and you know the reason you haven't got a raise is because of a faith that you pronounce? Is it family members? I think it's really important to go back to the source of of our accusations and to put them back in their place. Jesus cares about injustice. And so finally, testing is coming. Testing is coming. Revelation chapter 2, verse 10. Do not be afraid of what you are to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison and test you. That full stop is a scary sentence, right? Those words are going to be true for us in the years to come, I'm sure of it. And you will suffer persecution for 10 days. 10 days is not a literal 10 days. It's a figurative, a while. Be faithful even to the point of death. Thank goodness we don't suffer that today in this country for our faith. And I will give you life with a victor's crown. We had this guy in our church in Bournemouth when we started. And he was ex-SAS. And he was particularly scary. And he basically had done some stuff in the SAS and then had joined this group of African mercenaries. And he was a real danger. He was scary. He used to drink fairly heavily on the weekends because he couldn't handle his reality. And he would come down as we were preaching, walk to the front of church in the middle of the talk, always like you could smell alcohol on him from a mile away. Come to about here and get in our faces. I remember calling the police on him once, and like 6 wagons turned up within about 45 seconds. Like, he was a dangerous man, and he would get in our face. And there's not many people that I've been scared of in life, but he was one of them. He'd get in our face and shout abuse. Like, every time in the middle of, like, whenever we, in the evening service, every single week. And there was this one time, came in, walked down the aisle, and got to about here. And everyone was sort of smirking because it came this thing that some people from other churches used to come to have a little watch, because it was kind of vaguely amusing some of the time. Sometimes it wasn't, sometimes it was. And he came to the front here and he just shouted, I love this church. I love this church. And everyone was like, why? He said, this church, they're the church that gives up. And everyone giggled, no one knew what to do. Church, nice Christian, nice, polite, middle-class people, no one knew what to do. And we later we had a joke about, we were like, should we get some merch printing, love church, the church that gives, put it on pencil cases and, coffee cups and, we didn't do that actually. We're going to put Google reviews, the church that gives we didn't do it, but, he got right in our face. And it felt like this persecution. It felt like it was from the enemy. It felt, every week when, I can't tell you the stress of having to prepare a talk every week, not knowing when someone was going to come in who was ex-SAS and interrupt and push their way to the front and get physically abusive. I can't tell you the turmoil it was to be delivering a talk and constantly watching the door to think, is it going to be now? Is it going to be now? Is it going to be now? It added proper mental strain. Everyone get those paper ready. Everyone get this ready. On the count of 3, I'm going to get to throw them at me. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Here we go. I promise that with faith, we will face hard times. I promise with faith, people are going to throw things at us. Some things are going to be better than others. But I promise hard times are coming. Brick. Who's doing that? I promise hard times are coming. I promise we're going to face attack. I promise we're going to face persecution. That is part of what faith looks like in today's society. But there's a beautiful moment at the end, isn't there, where John wraps up and he says, but do not worry about what will be here. Think about what's coming. Don't live for a crown now, but live for an eternal crown. This place where you'll see beautiful, beautiful peace, beautiful life, beautiful hope. John is throwing us in. This exhortation, do not fear, is a common biblical, passage. Isaiah 41 speaks about it. Matthew 10 speaks about it, where we are reminded again of the sovereignty and the presence of God. God promises he will never allow you to be tested past the point that you can bear. And therefore, here's where I kind of conclude, having been going on and on and on and on. Verse 10, be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you a victor's crown. The church in Smyrna will be so aware of the teaching of Paul, where, in 1 Corinthians, he says, run the race, but don't run for, they would have seen the Olympics, don't run for a laurel crown, That's going to fade. Yeah, what happens to laurel? That plants, it withers and it dies and it goes moldy and it eventually becomes smelly and you throw it out. Don't race for that. Race for an eternal crown, a victor's crown, as John says, where we get to enter heaven's gates and see the beautifulness of who Jesus is. Do you remember we started this whole series where the martyred Christians in heaven were sat at the feet of Jesus singing praises and saying, it was worthy, he is worthy of it all. He is worthy of it all. Singing his praises. The one who is and was to come. Singing his praises. Like he is reminding them that this life is not it. We are going to face troubles and it is going to be hard. But this is not it. It is a smear, minute detail of our life when we consider eternity. And that actually as we enter into heaven, into that permanent place of glory, his glory will be unveiled and we'll be left in worship. And so he's saying, trouble is coming. But do not fear. Do not fear, because Jesus is sat on the throne. And that is the place that we will be forever and ever and ever and ever. Life here is short. Life in eternity is long.